You know, I loved in this book, there's a couple pieces around strategy. One by Jamie Henn, who runs Fossil Free Media, and another one by Chad Nelson, who runs the Surffighter Foundation. Jamie talks about creating a vision, mission, strategic plan, and Chad talks about strategies and tactics. And why I'm pointing to that is that, you know, I would bet that some of your listeners, like myself, are looking around the world and seeing so much presumably just not going well, right? And it's easy to get either deflated or enraged, or both. For me, is both. Sometimes I feel like, oh my God, I just need to check out. There's like, I don't know where or how to show up. And sometimes it's like all I want to do is show up and just drop everything else. And what those two pieces remind me is that, first of all, show up. And second of all, be very thoughtful and intentional about how you do that. So, for example, Chad's piece is just like making sure that you're clear around tactics and strategy. And like, not everything that you want to do is actually in service of the outcome that you seek. So really being thoughtful and discerning about the things that you invest yourself into, and ensuring that it actually has a pathway towards the real effect that you hope to achieve, is something that I think all of us should be taking stock of.
Hey folks, thanks for tuning in to the latest episode of the Ecosystem Member Podcast. For those of you who have listened to a range of our first 40-something episodes, you know that I think deeply and widely about our human relationship with nature and the more than human world. I love talking to artists, writers, musicians, and curators about the big thorny questions they examine through their work and the questions they're asking us through their work. I also love talking to adventurers, be it in food or business or athletics, who are pushing the boundaries of their categories and redefining that relationship with nature. But at some point, we need to buckle down and do the hard work of making sure that we still have the wild spaces and species that inspire these artists and energize these adventurers. To that end, today's guest is Nick Mucha, Director of Environmental Issues and Strategy at Patagonia. He's also a contributor to and one of the editors of the new book from Patagonia, Tools to Save Our Home Planet. After more than a decade in the nonprofit space, Nick was reenergized by attending Patagonia's Tools for Grassroots Activists conference back in 2013. That renewed sense of purpose and that energy eventually led him to a desk in Patagonia itself, where he now works on that Tools conference and with Patagonia's environmental nonprofit grantees and on Patagonia's overall approach to environmental issues and strategy. In this episode, we talk about Nick's path to Patagonia, that recently released book, and the role of environmental activism in the current political environment where many of the gains in the U.S. that environmental activists have achieved are under threat. This episode is coming on the heels of the success of grassroots organizations in organizing to get Utah Senator Mike Lee to remove his provision in President Trump's Big Beautiful Bill to sell off thousands of acres of public lands. But this episode is still a call to action to keep pushing. There will be budget cuts to departments like the National Parks and Forest Service that are likely going to make it harder and harder to protect these lands and the species that inhabit them. To that point, if you did email or call your senator or House representative to tell them to fight Senator Lee's provision, thank you, and make sure you're taking notes because you're probably going to have to do it again. But it does prove that this Big Ten approach to environmental activism that Nick actually outlines in this episode really works, even though Nick and I had this conversation more than a month ago, well before Mike Lee's attempt was brought to public light. We also talk a lot in this episode about Patagonia ActionWorks. It's a platform that helps connect Patagonia's grassroots environmental grantees with skilled volunteers who can help them with everything from copywriting to legal advice, letting them focus on where their skills are best applied on the issues that they're working on. It's a platform I'm personally passionate about. I've completed nearly 20 projects on the platform, and in recent weeks, through ActionWorks, I actually had calls with Friends of the Boundary Waters about its advertising strategy, and with Save the Yellowstone Grizzly about strategy needs and their new documentary, Return of the Grizzly, which is narrated by the actor Jeff Bridges, and is garnering absolute rave reviews from those who have seen it at festivals. I hope you enjoy this episode, and afterwards, please make sure to pick up your own copy of Tools to Save Our Home Planet and sign up for a project on Patagonia ActionWorks. I'd love to hear how you get on. So without further delay, here is our latest episode of the Ecosystem Member Podcast with Nick Mucha, Director of Environmental Issues and Strategy at Patagonia. Today on the Ecosystem Member Podcast, we are stoked to be joined by Nick Mucha, Director of Environmental Issues and Strategy at Patagonia. Thanks for joining us today, Nick.
Hey, how are you?
I am doing well. I'm really excited to talk to you. You guys were great in sending me a copy of the book, and I've just been devouring it. So I'm really excited to dig into your work and the book. And so maybe, though, we could start a little bit with your journey, with your story. So you write in the book, which is called Tools to Save Our Home Planet and features a ton of contributors, that you spent the better part of 20 years in the nonprofit space and you were just burned out. And then you went to this Patagonia Tools for Grassroots Activists conference, and that was a real turning point. So can you tell us a little bit about your story and how you ended up in this role at Patagonia as Director of Environmental Issues and Strategy?
Yeah, happy to be with you today and give some perspective on my background and talk about the book as much as you'd like. As you said, I've been in this work for the better part of 20 years. I started kind of devoting myself to imparting impact and making things better than I find them back in the early 2000s. I joined the Peace Corps. Me and my wife spent a couple years doing community-based work down in Honduras. For me, that really just unlocked the realization that, oh my gosh, I don't want to go back home and just collect paychecks and kind of put my head in the sand. I wanted to jump in with both feet and have this be both my work, my paychecks, and also my contribution to something bigger. So I started my own nonprofit organization down in Nicaragua. I ran that for 7 years. I stateside worked in a variety of organizations, usually leading kind of the programmatic work for various organizations. And as you noted, it did, after more than a decade, burn me out. It wasn't so much that I was burnt out and run thin. It was rather that I realized I was part of a bigger pattern, right? Everybody around me was kind of doing the same thing. We were all just pouring ourselves into the work and finding that there were just like all of these invisible barriers to making the kind of impact that we saw possible in the nonprofit space. And yeah, I was invited to go to the Tools for Grassroots Activists conference back in 2013, which is a conference that Patagonia hosts every 2 years for our grantee community. And it's basically kind of a boot camp for getting stuff done in kind of the impact space. And I came out of that experience hyper energized and feeling just ready to go. It supercharged my work. And a couple of years later, I had the opportunity to come and work for Patagonia to run that program and do additional capacity building work for the organizations that we support. And so that's how I got into this. Was I wanted to leverage my experience in the impact space to help Patagonia better show up as a funder, as a brand, as an activist company, to ensure other organizations and activists weren't coming up against those same invisible barriers that I referred to earlier. So we developed an entire portfolio of capacity building programs to help organizations do their best work and mitigate the burnout that is very prevalent out there.
And what are like 2 or 3 of those invisible barriers that have kind of stuck with you that now you're sort of trying to address through your work at Patagonia?
I think it's hard for organizations and individuals who just are so clear-eyed about the problems out there that we're trying to fix. It's really hard to right-size the work, right? It's like you want to do everything overnight. And so there's the tendency to like take on too much. And oftentimes, almost without exception, the resources and the capacity, internal capacity in nonprofit organizations are just a very real limiting factor. And so then how do you bring those two into alignment? How do you ensure that the resources that you have and your desire to do good are feasible, right? How do you actually take on not too much day after day? So that's a part of our work, is making sure that organizations are being strategically focused and not saying yes to everything, but really saying yes to a few things and then just absolutely getting after it. And I think another piece of the puzzle is just like organizational development. So I've been in multiple organizations where it just feels like this hamster wheel, where like every year you're trying to scale, resources are flat. And so how do you kind of step outside of the organization and look at the ecosystem of an organization? What are the different resources? What are the programs that are going to impart the change? How do you care for your people? And how do you hold all that holistically in a way that makes the organization stronger and more durable year after year versus being more and more tattered year after year?
And I think what's unique about Patagonia's approach, and maybe you could expand on this a little bit, is what you just talked about with the right sizing, because Patagonia funds primarily or almost exclusively, I'm not sure which, maybe you can explain that, grassroots organizations. So these are, I think, like small handful of people type of organizations working on specific issues, right?
Yeah, that's true. A lot of our funding and our work is geared towards the grassroots environmental space. And we've seen over decades that that's where we want to be in partnership. We see so much good work happening at that hyper local level. And that's both like a huge strength of the organizations, that they are able to be nimble and responsive. But it's also, as I was noting, it's a real, it's a liability as well when you're just a couple people engaged on something day after day. Like there's people get worn thin and you're susceptible to external factors.
And so you coming in with all this great experience on the nonprofit side, and Patagonia having its own history of backing these grassroots organizations, is there anything either you've learned from the business side or that the business side has learned from you that now is being spread into the wider business?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I think it has been for me just a great experience to come from just that pure like impact nonprofit experience to now walking into a larger corporation. And I think what's actually really interesting is, I have found that a lot of the skills and experiences translate both ways. Like here at Patagonia, I think we have a bit of a unique kind of corporate culture that is not always like dissimilar from kind of the grassroots environment that I come from, whereby, if there's a good idea, you have to organize around it. How do you bring people into something that you believe in, build stakeholders, build coalitions, and advance ideas and organize? That's very much the culture here at Patagonia too, is if you see a need, if there's a gap, how do you actually move into that gap and solve for it and kind of scale it throughout the organization? So that's one way in which like that grassroots work has translated here to the corporate side. And I'd say, one thing that I've learned here, like that applies to my work currently within Patagonia, like we build product and we build some damn cool product. And one of the design principles that I've heard referenced a lot, is like, you haven't reached a beautiful design when there's nothing more that you can add to something. Like real beautiful design is achieved when there's nothing that you can take away from it. So how do you build the most elegant, most minimal product possible? That is actually the high watermark for design standard. So that also applies to how we work with our nonprofit partners and stuff, is like, not this like ornate, very complex environment, but rather how do we find simplicity and humility in the way that we're engaging with and partnering with the sector.
And from what I understand, Patagonia is pretty integrated. I mean, you guys are all collaborating, as you just talked about. But has there ever been any tension in your time at the business between the people who are sort of like prioritizing the stoke and the adventure and you thinking about environmental consideration and, trying to influence the business in a certain direction while, at its heart, it's started by some climbers and adventurers?
Yeah. I'll give a two-part answer. I think that the beautiful thing is like, no, those two things actually live pretty symbiotically here internally. I think most people come to work for Patagonia not because they're just absolute sport junkies, but they understand that there's a balance to be struck there, and that we must care for and protect and be stewards for the resources that feed our sport addictions, right? Yet, nonetheless, I mean, it's obvious as well, like pick your sport, whether it be surfing or mountain biking or skiing. We can love things to death as well, right? So I think that is a healthy, natural tension, is like, we want to equip people to go do great things and enjoy the natural world and open spaces. And also we need to be mindful about how we're doing that, and hopefully working in partnership with those sport communities to be the front lines of those issues. I mean, that's how I came to this work. Was prior to working at Patagonia, I worked for a surfing-based conservation organization, right? So the notion is that, like, as surfers who are traveling the world and, coming, face to face with environmental issues day in and day out, how do we actually become the stewards of those communities and of those resources? And it's a real healthy way to bridge sport with conservation.
Awesome. And so I want to move into the book. So the new book, which you were a contributor to, as well as I believe one of the editors for, because it's this collection of everything from tips and recommendations to how-to guides and personal stories and case studies from all sorts of amazing people. It's titled Tools to Save Our Home Planet, and I believe there was a prior book that was related to the Grassroots Activists Conference as well. And with this new update, I think what really struck me, having read both of the books, is that with these contributors is that there's just not one way to be an environmental activist. There was younger people and older people, business people and lawyers, and, sort of the granola hippie types as well, that all contributed to this. And, I kind of loosely grouped them into, like, there's more science and technical based approaches, and then there's more like cultural based approaches. But thinking, broadly about all these contributors to the book and all the different recommendations and case studies that they share, do you, I think sometimes with the environmental community, we all are so passionate. You just talked about that urgency, and a lot of grassroots organizations can lead to burnout. Like, do you think we can recognize that it's okay to have all these different approaches, and that actually if we bring them all together, maybe we can be more effective?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no other way. The challenges before us are such that there is not going to be a silver bullet. If there's a silver bullet, it's collective action. And so how do we bring people from all stripes, different perspectives, different political persuasions, different socioeconomic backgrounds? Like, dang, this is going to take all of us if we're going to do this meaningfully. So I bristle when people say, like, well, actually it's all about the grassroots, or it's all about the grass tops. Wrong. It's both.
And so you, as someone has been in the nonprofit space and now working with all these different organizations through Patagonia, almost how do you approach these projects, given that each organization is unique, each community they're working with is unique, each of their problems is unique? Like, I know for some business people, they can, have their like consultancy frameworks and sort of apply them to any business problem. But it doesn't sound like that's possible, especially in the environmental grassroots space.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, for us, it's about getting clear around where we want to be showing up first and foremost. And we're in a process right now where we're just continuing through an inquiry-based process, understanding, like, of all the things out there. I mean, there are unlimited number of issues, unlimited number of challenges before us. We can't do all of it. Not at once. So first we have to prioritize what are the issues and what are the geographies where we want to be investing ourselves, and where do we want to be supporting other partners in the work. And once we have clarity around that, we have to find those organizations that are closest to the issues, that are really representing the communities that are most deeply affected through these issues, whether that's purely environmental issue, or if this is environmental justice, or if it's a community-based issue, those are the organizations that we want to be supporting and equipping them to tackle based on their experiences, right? So a lot of it really is about finding the best locally based organizations, and again, attacking issues from a variety of angles and a variety of levels. That has been our approach. And so our grant making team, for example, is deeply engaged in like building relationships with the people on the ground who are committing their lives to this work and supporting them as they pursue their strategies.
Yeah, that's awesome. We were emailing before, and I was mentioning how I've done some work through Patagonia Action Works with different environmental nonprofits, both UK, Ireland, and the US as well. And each one is so unique that when I was reading the book, it was great because I was coming across all these different articles and tips and recommendations and case studies that would have been so helpful to share with these organizations or have them had access to before we started. And we talked a little bit at the beginning about the Tools for Grassroots Activist Conference being a spark for you in this work. But not everyone would be able to attend that. There's a lot of different reasons why they might not be able to do that. So is the book sort of a way to scale lessons from that conference? Like, what is there a lot of transference of knowledge the same way that would happen at the conference?
Yeah, that was the original intent, right? So as you mentioned, we had a previous edition of this book. It was Tools for Grassroots Activists, which is the title of the conference itself. And so that was precisely the hope, was that it being an every 2-year limited size conference, it was a shame that was so exclusive in nature. So the book was a way to scale and impart among a greater spread the kind of core lessons and tenets of the conference itself. This new edition, the Tools to Save Our Home Planet, is a refreshed version of what we did back in 2016. And it also helps us to, in addition to packaging some of the lessons from the conference, we're also bringing in a lot of lessons from our global partners as well. So through the book, we hope that there's a really good kind of international distribution of lessons, case studies, and authors to showcase the amazing work that's happening across the globe.
Were there any contributions that you found particularly enlightening or exciting? Like maybe they hit on something that you weren't aware of or that you just hadn't articulated yet?
Oh man, there's so much in there. What's so great about the book is that there are so many examples of this work working. I mean, it's pretty easy. All you have to do is check your feed every day and you see how much is going awry. And this book is a very timely reminder that, and there's so much good stuff happening out there too. So make sure that you are giving your attention to the positive, productive work that's happening right now before us. I loved in this book, there's a couple pieces around like strategy. I'm actually going to look at my book right now, but I think, there's 2 pieces, one by Jamie Henn, who runs Fossil Free Media, and another one by Chad Nelson, who runs the Surffighter Foundation. And this is in the second part of the book, Clarifying Your Cause. Jamie talks about creating a vision, mission, strategic plan, and Chad talks about strategies and tactics. And why I'm pointing to that is that, I would bet that some of your listeners, like myself, are looking around the world and seeing so much presumably just not going well, right? And it's easy to get either deflated or enraged, or both. For me, is both. Sometimes I feel like, oh my God, I just need to check out. There's like, I don't know where or how to show up. And sometimes it's like all I want to do is show up and just drop everything else. And what those two pieces remind me is that, first of all, show up. And second of all, be very thoughtful and intentional about how you do that. So, for example, Chad's piece is just like making sure that you're clear around like tactics and strategy, and like not everything that you want to do is actually in service of the outcome that you seek. So really being thoughtful and discerning about the things that you invest yourself into, and ensuring that it actually has a pathway towards the real effect that you hope to achieve, is something that I think all of us should be taking stock of. When we're having conversations with neighbors that are leading us to certain conclusions, or you're seeing something in your community, or you're reading about something in the news, don't just jump to action. Take a beat to think and survey the landscape to understand, like, okay, where can I show up, and how is that going to lead to a positive outcome?
Yeah, I was really excited to see Jamie's contribution. I've been a big fan of Clean Creatives, which is part of the fossil-free media organization, and was excited to see that contribution there, because I think it really illustrates how, a number of examples in the book illustrate this, and same with Patagonia Action Works being able to do skill-based volunteering. It shows you just the amount of ways that even if you have a sort of professional career that you're excited or happy about, you can transfer those skills over to environmental movement, whether it be, advertising, copywriting, strategic thinking, consulting, or a lawyer. Like, all these things can be really valuable. And that, again, points that diversity in the book, where I kind of almost feel like some folks might be intimidated by its size, but it actually is more digestible because you can flip through and find the things that are going to be most relevant to you.
Yeah, I'm glad you felt that. And just to double down on that last point, Rick, is, I feel like sometimes people are like, activist. I'm not an activist. Like, that's activists, like, get arrested and like know what to do in the face of tear gas and stuff, right? That is true in some cases, but in many cases it's not. In today's age, anybody who gives a shit about something can get involved. Like you said, through Patagonia Action Works, through skill-based volunteering, you can copy edit somebody's website for an organization that you believe deeply in, and that is advancing their work. Going back to the burnout question, the more of us that show up and fill gaps and contribute to the larger body of work, the better equipped these organizations are to focus in on the actual problem solving that's required of them. And so, yeah, please dispel of the fact that like you have to be marching in the streets to actually be making change. Rather, you can do that in so many variety of ways. And usually it's a way that each of us has like our own unique superpower that you can add to the collective.
And along that line, what would you say to someone who maybe sees this book in the bookstore? They've picked up another sort of one of Patagonia's books that they've published through the publishing arm, sees this book, is really excited about some of the stuff they hear. But, a thing I often hear from people is they say, oh, well, I fly X times a year, I eat meat, or I do this, I can't be an environmental activist. Like, what would you tell them to encourage them to participate and get over that hump?
I will start with a quote that I probably repeat too often, which is from Senator Cory Booker, right? Which is to say, don't let your inability to do everything undermine your determination to do something. And so get rid of that false premise that because you do A, B, or C, you can't do this other thing. The fact is, like, kind of like what Jamie Henn and Chad Nelson are pointing to in their pieces, is like, get specific and get small, get granular, pick something and get after it. And you don't have to radically transform your life. It doesn't have to be some like monumental shift. It means like pick something that you can focus on and do it. And, I was reminded today from a colleague of a quote from Adrienne Marie Brown, which is small is all, right? So like do something small and do that, repeat that day in and day out. And that actually plays out over time.
And so looking at the variety of content in the book, one that I wanted to ask you about in particular, because it relates to kind of what Patagonia has been in the news about for the last couple of years in terms of its change of ownership structure. So with Yvon Chouinard essentially donating the company profits going towards supporting environmental nonprofits and the grassroots work that we're just talking about. And some people say that, there's been the issues around like claiming it's a tax dodge and all of that, which I think is pretty unfounded. But one that's come out more recently is that it just sort of enforces the status quo in that it allows people and organizations with a lot of money sort of influence politics. And one of the chapters in the book is actually about lobbying, and it's written by a professional lobbyist. So I think it was interesting because a lot of the book focuses on sort of bottom up grassroots. You just mentioned that we actually need all layers. So maybe that's part of this answer. But like, as a strategist, how do you think about balancing that urgency and that desire to get things done and needing to sort of work within the existing system with maybe the more longer term systematic change that might, like, you know, remove money from politics or remove corporate influence from politics? How do you balance that sort of short term and long term working within the system versus trying to change the system?
Yeah, again, I do point back to my previous comment, which is like it's neither or. I mean, we all need to learn how to contribute to a shared body of work, and how do we have a tent big enough where we're able to have like the nitty gritty on the grounds, like hardcore activists and those that know how to wear a suit in the halls of Congress and hold hands in terms of a shared outcome. And there are beautiful examples of that work happening. In fact, I would argue that most of the good work happening needs to have both of those hands at the table. And the chapter that you're referring to, I believe, is Kai Anderson, who is like he offers a very poignant like how to lobby piece, because at some point, hopefully, if you're engaged in this work, you do have the opportunity to work at the highest levels of that system, of our government system, and go and make the case face to face with elected officials about issues that matter to you. And that isn't something that we should scoff at. Rather, those are opportunities that we need to embrace and be effective in those moments when they arise. And Kai, in this book, gives basically a primer on, okay, don't do this and do that. And I mean, if anybody here is about to go do a fly-in in DC or go to their state capitol or even go down the street and meet with a city council member, read that chapter and I can guarantee you will avoid some pitfalls and you will be doing a couple things way better than you would have if you didn't read that piece. And like, we don't have time to waste. Like, get good at what you're doing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I, in a past life, through one of my jobs at a nonprofit, I got the chance to go to DC with some of the people in the organization. Because I was from Texas, I got asked to go to Ted Cruz's office. I saw the famous Dr. Seuss book sitting on the shelf. You know, and I think what was really enlightening about that is just about how many layers often are put between us and our elected officials. And I think what that article does is sort of help someone who, you know, was in my position would have been able to understand how to make a case to break through all those different layers to sort of give the right information to be effective, which I think is kind of like the benefit of having this alongside everything else, is that you kind of need to be prepared when you get this opportunity, even if it's not necessarily an opportunity you're originally aiming for.
Yeah. And, you know, in addition to what to say and what not to say, Kai offers up just like these great little tidbits. Like your meeting's probably going to be cut short. And so do A, B, and C first, follow up with this type of thank you letter. Like there's just some basics that were enlightening to me. And so, I hope everybody that picks up this book continues to find it as enlightening as I did. And I edited the darn thing.
Yeah. So kind of on that political side of things, I guess, you know, for my sins, I set up some Google alerts around Trump nature and Trump climate change. I get these daily sort of digests of the range of actions the administration is taking, sort of degrade, potentially sell our wild and public lands. With an administration in the U.S. that we're dealing with right now that's moving so fast, and at least in my opinion, sort of so indiscriminately, like just shooting at everything, or maybe that's part of their strategy. What can an individual activist or a grassroots nonprofit sort of do to keep up? Well, it almost seems impossible to even stay informed, let alone respond and take action.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's any accident. You know, the jargon "flood the zone" is, I think, very apt, and it's a very real phenomenon where it is becoming overwhelming, and as I noted earlier, deflating. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't possibly keep pace with this. Yet we've realized and we've seen over the past number of months that like resistance is not futile, right? I mean, we're seeing things get put forth at the highest levels that through civic participation and protest and through organizations and organizers being very deft at what they do, we're able to slow and reverse some of the ideas that are being put forth. So my guidance on that would be to A, hold the ground, B, stay hyper focused. I think by being disoriented and spinning and chasing the news that come into your pocket every hour, we are all the less equipped to be formidable in our defense. So pick one or two or three things and hold the ground. And thirdly, I think, as you noted before, like Patagonia Action Works, shameless plug here, but this is an opportunity for people that feel overwhelmed and don't know where to start. I mean, it's a very convenient, user-friendly way to understand, okay, within my own community. So I guess for the listeners, Patagonia Action Works it's a digital platform that we built that helps the general public see who are the organizations that Patagonia is funding within the U.S. and beyond. But you can zoom into your neighborhood, your zip code, and see across climate or biodiversity or land and water protection or agriculture, who are the organizations that are doing the good work, and it offers up ways in which you can engage with them, whether that be helping them organize an event, or whether that be they need somebody on their board of directors, or everything in between. And you can start to show up. And it's this, like Cory Booker was saying, do something.
And so to kind of bring our conversation to a close, I'd like to kind of pull out long-term view as someone with significant experience in the nonprofit space. What is sort of your leaving piece of advice or a story or something you'd like to share that kind of is like, I guess, a kick in the pants for those of us trying to get into it? Like, what have you learned that will give us hope or motivation to kind of keep moving forward on this environmental activism?
I think that the benefits of showing up, the benefits of taking this work seriously, of not looking the other way when deep in your gut things aren't going well and things can be better. The benefits of that are multifold, right? So yes, you have the opportunity to actually course correct. How do we protect a patch of land or a stretch of river or protect a community from a harmful project? That's great. And that's usually what gets us out of bed and continue to show up. But there's a lot of joy in the work too, so like, yeah, it's hard. It's very wonky, gritty work. And a lot of it's straight up not sexy, like sitting at city council meetings until 10 o'clock at night when your stomach's growling. Like a lot of it is just like grit and determination. And there's also a ton of joy and community and effervescence in the work as well. And I just want people to remember that this isn't like a sacrifice that you have to make. You get to decide if you just live blissfully ignorant of the problems, or you choose like this dark, heavy life of action. I think that actually choosing to show up and devote yourself towards something bigger than yourself is actually where meaning and purpose and community and connection exist. And so for those that are wondering what to do or how to approach this kind of like daily fork in the road, choose action.
That's awesome advice. I wholeheartedly agree. The first ActionWorks project I did worked on some strategy for them, for a group in Cornwall, to help fund a marine ranger to track these gray seals that are pretty rare and unique to the area. And when we hit that fundraising goal and they were able to hire this person, was able to make sure that we were monitoring this, sort of unique rare species. It felt great. It gives you a really good kick to move forward. So I encourage everyone to do that. I encourage everyone to go out and pick up the book, Tools to Save Our Home Planet. Thanks for joining us today, Nick.
All right, thank you so much, Rick. It was a treat.